Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new session of our webinar series on data science and statistics. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Michelangelo Ceci from the University of Bari Aldo Moro in Italy. Michelangelo is now full professor of computer science at Aldo Moro. His research interests in the fields of machine learning and data mining focus on advanced data analytics, complex structured data, and semi-supervised learning. In these areas, he has published a large number of papers in leading journals and international conferences in machine learning and data mining. Professor Ceci has also been a committee member for major conferences like IEEE, ECDM, IGCAI, AAAI, program co-chair of ICML PKDD in 2017 and next year, 2026, Discover Science 2016 and more. And he also been a general chair of ICML PKDD in 2017. He is also associate editor for leading journals Machine Learning and Data Mining and Knowledge Discovery. Today, Michelangelo will talk to us about semi-supervised learning from complex data. Thank you very much, Michelangelo, for having accepted our invitation. We are looking forward to your talk, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paula, for your very kind introduction, and thank you, Paula and Eduarda, for your kind invitation, which I was very pleasant to accept. Today, as Paula said, we will be talking about semi-supervised learning from complex data, which is a topic I touched for many years now. Okay, I will skip this introduction about myself, which was excellently done by Paula, and I will talk. I will start with the very first definitions here. The first definition is that of semi-supervised learning. Actually, this is not a very definition. This is an intuitive definition. In classical supervised learning, we use labeled data to build a predictive model. Actually, doing so, we discard a large amount of information which are potentially hidden in unlabeled instances. In semi-supervised learning, on the contrary, we use both labeled and unlabeled data, and they are used to build a predictive model. The intuition is that, as I said, unlabeled data, while they do not contain the labels, they still contain information which is useful for learning models. Let's see this example. Suppose that we start with two positive examples, two negative examples, and we use a classifier to predict them. Imagine that we are using a simple support vector machine, for example, and what happens is that the support vector machine will learn this hyperplane, this separating hyperplane between positive and negative examples. But if we start to consider also unlabeled examples, which are colored with the cyan in this picture, it is immediately clear that this separating hyperplane is not the best separating hyperplane, even if for these examples we don't have the labels. So intuitively, the best separating hyperplane here is this one, not the purple one. And this because we start to see the distribution of the data independently of the labels. And this distribution of the data suggests us new separating hyperplanes in this case, but new models in general cases. So there is behind the semi-supervised learning a philosophical motivation. The human brain can exploit unlabeled data. And this is clear from the example that we have just seen. But there is also a pragmatic motivation. Unlabeled data is usually cheaper to collect with respect to labeled data and easy to obtain. So in general, labeled data are scarce and expensive, And here we can make many examples, like experiments in computational biology, where label data are obtained through experiments in the lab, real experiments performed by biologists. It is necessary to have large expert knowledge. The process is tedious and time-consuming, and as I said, expensive. On the contrary, unlabeled instances are abundant, typically, and cheap. Imagine, for example, data collected by satellites, no? Or data obtained by DNA sequencing, which are, I mean, it is very easy to obtain a lot of data in many contexts, and specifically also in scientific contexts. Okay, so on the contrary of supervised learning, in semi-supervised learning, we said that we use both labeled and unlabeled examples, and we learn a model using both labeled and unlabeled. But, well, here we can distinguish, however, two subcategories of semi-supervised learning. The first one is called transductive setting. So the idea is that at the beginning of the process, when we are going to learn, we know the labeled examples and we know the unlabeled examples on which we have to predict the label. Okay, so the testing data actually are available during the learning stage. On the contrary, in the inductive setting, semi-supervised inductive setting, well, the idea is that we have labeled instances, we have unlabeled instances, but we still generate a model. And this model can be used to predict any unlabeled instance that will come in the future, that we don't have at the moment of the learning step. So we have these two variants, transductive and inductive, but they are both semi-supervised. Okay, just to put to use some variables here, in the transductive setting, the total number of examples is composed by the unlabeled and labeled examples that are known at the beginning of the learning stage. While here in the inductive setting, we have potentially an infinite number of unlabeled instances, which are much greater as a set than the number, the initially available unlabeled and labeled instances. Okay, just a bit of history behind the semi-supervised and transductive learning. Transductive learning was firstly introduced by Vapnik in 1974. So imagine how much time. And then it was not really considered a very nice or important discovery, this of using unlabeled instances, but the interest in transductive learning increased in 1990s, when there were a lot of applications in text classification. But the semi-supervised learning world or topic as we know it today was somehow established by this book by Chappell, Shopfov, and Zien in 2006. So the terminology actually comes from there, comes from this book. So it's quite recent. It's not as established research topic. So where it comes from? It comes from, theoretically speaking, the idea of semi-supervised learning from the smoothness assumption. Well, we regularly use in classification the smoothness assumption. It says that if 2 points x1 and x2 are close, then so should be the corresponding outputs y1 and y2, y1 for x1 and y2 for x2. And this is what we do in many classification algorithms, like, for example, KNN. It is based on similarity, no? But what we do in semi-supervised learning is to add some details here. If 2 points x1 and x2 are in a high density region close, then so should be the corresponding outputs y1 and y2. So this means, in other words, that if 2 points are separated by a low density region, then the output is not necessarily the same. So the output y1 and y2 can be different. This is also called label smoothness assumption. And let's see an example. Suppose we have a negative example here, defined with the asterisk, a positive example here, and we have to classify this example. According to the one nearest neighbor algorithm, this is essentially classified as asterisk, not as plus. So a negative example. But if we start to consider unlabeled instances in blue here, we see that there is a low density region that separates the two areas. So probably we are inclined to classify this example not as negative anymore, but as positive. The same happens here. This maybe is to be classified as a negative if we don't see labeled examples, but when we start to see unlabeled examples, we notice that they are in the same, the positive example and the example to be classified are in the same area, high density region. And following the high density region here, the negative example is much far away than the positive example. So, of course, there is also a low density region here in the middle. So at the end, we have to consider unlabeled examples also. And this idea of having a separating space that is a low density region is a bit intriguing for the classification step. But this idea does not come alone. I mean, it is also similar to the cluster assumption. Imagine that you want to cluster examples, like for example here. So you would create 2 clusters here. And of course, if you create 2 clusters, this example to be classified belongs to the first cluster and not to the second cluster. And maybe we can classify this example on the basis of the majority voting of labeled examples in this cluster. And this is essentially the idea of early algorithms for semi-supervised learning. The idea was at the beginning to run clustering algorithms and use the labeled points to assign a class to each cluster. And this, I mean, is very basic algorithm and guarantees, satisfies the principles of clustering assumption and this idea of low density separation. But during the years, over the years, we have seen many algorithms for semi-supervised learning, and we start from another very simple approach, which is the self-training algorithm. So the idea is to start from the labeled examples, set of labeled examples L, to learn a model, which is indicated as F in this slide, and then predict unlabeled instances on the basis of the function F. Then we have to select the predictions X, F of X, that are more, for which we are more confident. So the ones for which we are more confident on the labels are actually added to the training set. And we repeat the procedure. So we learn again, but this time the labeled examples contains also examples that are not labeled according to the ground truth, according to in the training examples, but they are being labeled by the prediction function learned at the previous stage. Self-training has some pros. For example, well, it is very simple. It works as a wrapper method because it can be applied to any arbitrarily complex classifier. It is used in many occasions, like, for example, in natural language processing. But there is one big concern. Early mistakes could reinforce themselves. And this is a very big problem in self-training, because if the algorithm commits an error at the early stages, this error is the wrong label is used as ground truth for the next iterations. We cannot say too much about convergence here because it is difficult to establish when to stop, to iterate and decide. But there are special cases where the self-training is actually very similar to expectation maximization, which is essentially for clustering, and we have the same problems as for the EM algorithm. We also have generative models for semi-supervised learning, and okay, we can start from this example here and assume that each class has a Gaussian distribution. We can build, approximating a Gaussian function, we can identify the decision boundaries. And of course, we will find something like this, no? Where the green is the decision boundary, and here we have the Gaussian functions that approximate the data distribution. But of course, if we start to consider also unlabeled examples, here we see that the distribution may change, and of course the decision boundary changes as well. And of course, here we are entering into the probabilistic world with the generative Gaussian models. And of course, here we are adding the unlabeled examples in the second case. But at the end, we have to estimate a parameter theta, which is present here and here. So it's not very difficult from the point of view of the algorithm to estimate theta. And we can use very well-established methods like maximum likelihood estimate, maximum a posteriori estimate, or Bayesian, the Bayesian formula for estimating theta. Okay. Well-studied probabilistic framework is this of generative models. It is very effective, but there are many cons here as well. The first big problem is that we are assuming that data are distributed according to a Gaussian distribution. And this is not always the case, because the distribution of the data can be different. And maybe the parameters, it does not make sense to estimate the parameters of a distribution that does not fit the data. Okay, support vector machines. Also, support vector machines are work in the semi-supervised setting, specifically in the transactive setting. And here, the idea is, independently of the if we are learning linear or other forms of separating hyperplanes with the kernel trick, the idea here is to optimize a function which includes this term here. And this term is essentially a term which tries to keep the area here in the middle as empty as possible, so without unlabeled examples, so that we enforce the smoothness assumption and the idea of having low density regions that separate classes. With the support vector machines, transactive support vector machines proposed by Torsten Jochims many years ago, are applicable where all support vector machines are applicable. So, I mean, the range of applications is very huge. We have a clear mathematical framework here, but the problem is the fact that the optimization can be difficult because in terms of time complexity, and this is a big problem when we have a lot of data. I remind you that there are, it is true that they are applicable whenever support vector machines are applicable, but support vector machines are typically learned for binary classification. There is another problem. Since this is an optimization problem, we can work on a dual problem, the original problem, but in any case, we can get trapped in a local optima. And this is a kind of problem that we have in support vector machines and actually also in transductive support vector machines. Okay, more recently, we have many approaches in deep learning that use unlabeled examples for in the learning stage. And one of the most famous approaches here is presented in this paper. Big self-supervised models are strong semi-supervised learners, which was published in NeurIPS 2020. And as you can see, there are very famous authors here. Geoffrey Hinton, that won after a few years, won the Nobel Prize. So here the idea is that we start from unlabeled data, generic unlabeled data. We learn a task-agnostic convolutional neural network here. This neural network is fine-tuned using the class labels. So here we somehow fine-tune the network and we change the weights of the network using the labeled examples. What happens here is that from unlabeled data, we learn a new convolutional neural network. These are task-specific, so these are not generic like these unlabeled data, but unlabeled data from the task we want to solve. And the idea is to use this big fine-tuned neural network, convolutional neural network, to extract a new neural network, which is a student network, as it is typically done in distillation. So here we have a big network, and this big network is used as trainer for a small student neural network, which is becomes more reliable than the big one. This is the idea behind this approach, which received a lot of success in the literature. But there are also others, many others approaches. I would like to mention this one. In this one, we use labeled data and unlabeled data, and this is the idea is to learn a model M. And this model is used to minimize the supervised cross entropy loss, as usual in classical classification. So we are learning deep neural networks here as well. But this model here is also used to predict the label of unlabeled data. What's the trick here? The trick is that the unlabeled data are augmented, so they are transformed in some way, and also on the transformed version of the data, they apply the same model, M, and at the end, the prediction of M and M on the original unlabeled data and on the augmented and transformed unlabeled data should be as much as possible consistent, the same. So here we have another loss, or another part of the same loss, which tends to reduce the consistency, to improve, optimize the consistency between the two predictions on the original unlabeled data and on the augmented unlabeled data. So altogether here, the two losses are combined into the final loss. So at the end, this is an end-to-end learning process. And the idea is to learn M such that in the three cases for the two sub-losses, this M optimizes the final loss. So this is another very famous paper published in, again, New Rips. And also here, the idea is to exploit unlabeled data, and they empirically prove that using unlabeled data is very helpful. Actually, there are a lot of approaches in the literature, and I can refer to this survey appeared 2 years ago in IEEE Transactions on Knowledge and Data Engineering, where we can see that there are many semi-supervised approaches from generative adversarial networks, for variational autoencoders, for graph neural networks. I mean, for every big family of deep learning approaches. But at the end, the idea is always the same. We have this unsupervised loss, which is another term that goes into the final loss. And this unsupervised loss is optimized together with all the rest. So not separately, but all together. Okay, and this is having the same idea that is also reported here, where we have the supervised loss and the unsupervised loss, and they are combined in the final optimization stage. Today, I would like also to enforce the idea that semi-supervised learning can also be used not just for the classical classification, regression tasks, but also for more complex tasks like multi-target regression, multi-label classification, hierarchical multi-label classification. In these three cases, we introduce complexity in the outputs, but also we can introduce complexity in the input, like for example, in classification, regression, link prediction from network data or relational data. So we can have complexity in the input, we can have complexity in the output, and still semi-supervised learning can help. Let's start from the output. Here we have multi-target prediction, where we have multi-target prediction for classification. The target space is not composed by one single variable. We have 3 variables in this case, and they have to be predicted all together in one shot. So the model should contain the prediction for all the 3. And here also, but this is regression. What's the idea? The idea is multi-target prediction. The target space, the target variables are not independent each other, and learning in one single model, the prediction function, can help to keep into account possible dependencies over the variables over the target space. So here we have multi-label classification also as a task, where each single example can be classified according to several labels. And we also have a hierarchical multi-label classification, where examples can be classified according to a hierarchy of categories. This is a variant of multi-label classification, and this happens in many cases in the real world, like, for example, gene function prediction, where the function can be at a certain level, but it can be also at a lower level of specificity, and the labels are, of course, not independent. Okay, here what we did in this case was to adapt predictive clustering trees. Predictive clustering trees are originally designed as top-down induction algorithm for decision trees. But the idea is that at each step, at each internal node, the idea is to build a cluster, not really just partitioning. And this at the end means that we can obtain clusters at the leaves. And when we obtain the clusters at the leaves, we can predict multiple targets simultaneously. So it well fits with the idea of multi-target prediction, multi-label classification. Well, what's the trick? The heuristic that is used is this variance function that works on the target space. What we did was to extend this variance function and work also on the descriptive space, so on the independent variables. So by varying the value of this W here, variable, we are able to make the algorithm fully unsupervised, like clustering, fully supervised, or semi-supervised, when W is different from 0 and different from 1. And this was published in these two papers here that I would like to mention. And of course, this algorithm works independently on whether the variable is numeric or nominal. It just changes the variance indication function, which is real variance or mathematical variance, or the Gini index if it is nominal. Okay, this was extended also to random forests because classical decision trees or regression trees are nowadays considered not very accurate, but random forests are. But I mean, we are able to extend this very easily to random forests. Here we report some statistical analysis, the p-values, comparing semi-supervised version of PCTs versus the original PCT, or random forest versus the original random forest. For multi-target regression, multi-label classification, and hierarchical multi-label classification, we see that the semi-supervised approach is very beneficial with respect to the non-semi-supervised in the classical inductive counterpart. Also, this happens not just for complex output, but also for classical primitive output tasks, binary classification, multi-class classification, and regression. We applied this in the context of predicting the biological activity of molecules, starting from its chemical structure. The idea is to provide chemical compounds, which are new drugs, for example, so new molecules, and to predict the toxicity of the molecule on the basis of the structure, chemical structure. And this is a standard part of the classical drug discovery process that is applied in the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, also here we applied our semi-supervised learning approach, and as you can see, the results were very, very nice compared to the inductive counterparts. Here, the inductive counterparts are in purple and yellow. The semi-supervised versions are in black and red. Okay, we also had the opportunity to work on network data. So here we have the complex part in the structure of the network. And when we work with the network data, we have the so-called phenomenon of network autocorrelation. What's the autocorrelation? The idea is that if two nodes in a network are connected, then also the labels are connected. But this is very similar to what we have started from today, the smoothness assumption. And this happens in network data. In some sense, the positive autocorrelation entails the semi-supervised smoothness assumption. And this happens in many cases, in many network data. like, for example, in social networks or in bioinformatics, because proteins that share more or less the same context in the biological networks are more likely to share the same function that than instead randomly selected proteins or genes. The same happens in spatial data. Also in spatial data, we have that points that are close to each other tend to share some properties, including labels. And this comes from laws in geography, Tobler law in geography. But we concentrate today, we focus on the network data. And here we have nodes that represent entities, links that connect them. And the idea is to exploit semi-supervised approaches in this context. Networks are complex entities, are complex data structures. And here we can also have some sources of additional complexity, like, for example, heterogeneous or homogeneous networks, because the entities, the nodes, can be of the same type or of different types. Data can be labeled and unlabeled, can be described by multiple attributes, defined at different level of abstractions, and the same happens for the links, which can be of the same type or of different types, can be labeled also the links, and can be defined at different levels of abstraction. But what is important is that nowadays we do not have the so-called across-network inference. So in the cross-network inference, we have a model that is learned on a network and is applied to another network. But nowadays, in most of cases, we have a network that is available at the beginning, and the problem is to predict some labels that are missing. And this is the case of biological networks. This is the case of social networks, where the idea is to predict, for example, the behavior, the tendency of users in social network, or the function associated to some proteins in biological networks. So this really fits with the semi-supervised and the transactive settings, because we know the network, we know the unlabeled instances at the very beginning, and we have just to predict the labels for them, not for other data that we don't know at the beginning. We have applied this to biological network analysis for the task of gene network reconstruction. And the idea here was to learn to combine the prediction of multiple prediction methods, and we worked again in the semi-supervised setting. Actually, in this setting, we also have another source of complexity which comes from the fact that the data are positive unlabeled. We don't have negative labels, okay, in a negative class. Because either we know that there is something, or we don't know, no? And this means that the learning set is PU, positive unlabeled setting. Okay, let's see this example, this picture here. So the idea is to take the network and construct different views of the same network. The different views of the same network. The idea is to learn a semi-supervised classifier from one view, another semi-supervised classifier from another view, and use the predictions for the other views. So in this case, we are actually extending the idea of co-training provided by Mitchell and others many years ago, but in the semi-supervised setting, using some form of ensemble learning, and for this task of in biological network analysis for network reconstruction. We have done some experiments here. And we see here that the orange and the blue lines are the ones that adopt our algorithm, and they provide the best F-score in this case for Escherichia coli and for yeast datasets. Also social media. In social media, we have the problem. This comes from a project that I was working on until a couple of years ago. The problem was to identify from social network possible users that have to be classified as a risky user, because they can, for example, share spread some religious fundamentalism, political extremism, and they have to be considered risky users because of some illicit use of the social media. So what's the idea? The idea is that the classical approaches here use just the content, textual content of the posts of people, but of course it is. We also have additional information like the structure of the network, who is following who, for example in Twitter or X, and the idea is to exploit not only the content, the textual content of the post, but also the friendship or follow relationships in the social network. But also we use spatial information because some posts come from the spatial location. And the idea is to have 3 views from the same data in the semi-supervised setting. And here we analyze the textual content with different 2 autoencoders. We also apply, we also exploit the topology of the network, of the social network, to learn a classification model that uses only the network, and also a classification model that uses the spatial proximity of the posts. And they have been combined according to a stacked generalization approach of ensembling to obtain final predictions. In our recent work in MENS, this part here, the topology network analysis and spatial network analysis, has been replaced by graph sage, which is a kind of graph convolutional neural network approach that works not only in the semi-supervised setting, but also in the inductive setting. And surprisingly, some results, not all the results, confirm that considering the topological, which is indicated here as structure, as RR relationships, topological structure of the data, so the network data, leads to improve the classification accuracy by a great margin. So the network, considering the network structure, is important, and the network structure is considered according to the transductive, not really generally supervised, but semi-supervised, but transductive approach. To present another approach here. Here the idea is again applied to biological networks. The idea is that we have objects of different types, so this is an heterogeneous network. So the shape indicates the type of the node, which can be protein, which can be molecules, can be pathways, biological entities in general. So the idea is to perform some kind of clustering, which is heterogeneous clustering from network data, and to predict the labels of the examples that do not have the labels, like in this graphical representation, the empty nodes. This is done according to the concept of metapaths, and the idea is to have some distance functions that can be applied to any kind of node according to the context, and use this distance function to extract a hierarchy of clusters, which are essentially subgraphs, subnetworks, heterogeneous subnetworks, which are then used to predict the labels in the majority voting context. Okay, so here we have a very small heterogeneous network, and this is classified examples, unclassified examples here, labeled examples here are classified according to the majority voting criteria. Okay, this has been applied to microRNA disease link identification to identify the connection between some diseases and microRNAs, which are small pieces of non-coding RNA, which are for which we don't know the function. I mean, not me, but biologists don't know the function. And the results are pretty good also on this task. I'm going quite fast here, just to show you that we discovered, and this is an interesting discovery, this long coding RNA, which is named H19, has many connection with some cancer diseases, and this was essentially were discovered by our algorithm, the connections, but this is also confirmed by many papers in the literature, in the biomedical literature. This is a way to identify some potential factors of risk from blood samples of data obtained by blood samples. Okay, I will skip this part here, and I will go straight to the conclusions. Well, there is in the recent years, since many years ago, where semi-supervised learning was established, we say around 2006, we have seen a rapidly grow and even exponential growth of interest in semi-supervised learning. These are papers published in the topic of semi-supervised learning taken from Scopus. However, when we start to analyze scientific data, complex data, we have to use semi-supervised learning in a more complex way. So for structural auto prediction, for network data, for relational data. But there are, many other possibilities for future work. Time series data, why not? Also time series data can be used in the semi-supervised setting. And the combinations of network data, structured auto prediction, network data, time series data. But still, there are some theoretical questions that remain open. Why many studies report of negative effects of semi-supervised learning? This is studied, in many contexts. It is true in many contexts. Of course, not in the context I reported today, but we also had some negative examples in the sense that semi-supervised learning was not effective, but led to reduce the accuracy of the models. And the possible answer, but it is still to be well studied, is how much the smoothness assumption influences the beneficial effects of semi-supervised learning. And there are recent papers that try to solve this theoretical question. Okay, I would like to end here my talk. And what I presented here actually is not the work of just myself, but a large number of people that I would like to thank. And thank you again for all of you for attending this seminar. And if there are questions,